What if history flipped? What if Montezuma marched on Madrid, or sailed into... What if the Spanish, reeling from the loss of their empire, sued for peace with the Aztec king? Well, buckle up, because today we're diving into just that scenario. But before we dive into this alternate history, let's quickly cover real history. In the 1500s, the Spanish conquered the mighty Aztec Empire, but it wasn't a fair fight. The Aztecs were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and tussled by the conquistadors, who had steel armor, gunpowder, weapons, and horses. Plus, the Spanish were fighting on the side of the gods, or so they believed. And unfortunately for the Aztecs, they were in the wrong place at the right time. They had been devastated by smallpox, which ravaged their population, killing millions and left them weakened and susceptible to further attacks. To add insult to injury, the conquistadors used Aztec gold to buy off their allies, turning many indigenous groups against their former friends. With all these factors working against them, it might seem like there was no way the Aztecs could have won. But what if they had one key advantage? What if the Aztecs had ships? Now, how they got those ships is anyone's guess. Maybe the Mayans passed on their knowledge of oceanic navigation after the Spanish destroyed their cities. Or perhaps the Aztecs encountered other advanced maritime cultures along the coast of Africa or Asia and learned from them. All we know for sure is that in our timeline, the Aztecs never developed a navy capable of crossing the ocean. But in this alternate timeline, they do. And when Cortez landed in the Americas, he was shocked to see that the natives had ships. But the Aztecs weren't just sitting around waiting for the Spanish to invade. They took their revenge to Spain. And here's why. At the time of the Spanish conquest, Spain was still a bit of a mess. Sure, they had just kicked the Moors out of Spain in 1492, but the country was still fragmented politically, socially, and economically. The old wounds of the Reconquista were still fresh and the country was vulnerable to attack. Not to mention that the Spanish were still figuring out how to manage their newfound wealth and power. It was the perfect opportunity for the Aztecs to strike. And strike they did. In the 1490s or 1500s, an Aztec fleet crossed the Atlantic Ocean and landed on the shores of Iberia. The local Spanish soldiers and peasants were completely shocked by what they saw. The Aztec warriors were dressed in brightly colored garments and feathered headdresses. Their skin was painted in intricate patterns, and their bodies adorned with jewelry made of precious stones. And then there was their weaponry. The Spanish had never seen anything like it. The Aztecs brandished sharp obsidian blades and shields made of hard wood. They also used psychological warfare tactics that terrified their enemies. For example, the Aztecs would often pretend to be much weaker than they actually were, hoping to lure their opponents into a false sense of security. Once the unsuspecting enemy got close enough, the Aztec warriors would unleash a sudden and powerful attack, often catching their opponents off guard. This tactic was especially effective against the Spanish, who were not used to fighting against such unorthodox methods. The Aztecs were also known for their ritualistic approach to warfare, which involved chanting, dancing, and making human sacrifices to their gods. This only added to the mystique and terror surrounding the Aztec army in the eyes of the Spanish. When the news of the Aztec invasion reached the Spanish monarchs, they were in disbelief. They couldn't believe that these so-called barbarians could pose a threat to their mighty kingdom. But as the Aztec armies began to advance, it became clear that this was no hoax. The Spanish monarchs quickly assembled an army to defend their homeland. But when the two forces met in battle, the Spanish were defeated. The Aztec warriors were fierce and relentless, and their strange weapons and tactics baffled the Spanish soldiers. As the Aztec armies grew in strength and confidence, they began to march on major cities. First on their list was Seville, one of the most important cities in Spain. The Aztec army laid siege to the city and began bombarding it with arrows and stones. The Spanish defenders were overwhelmed and soon the city fell to the invaders. Next, the Aztecs marched on Toledo, another major city in Spain. Again, the Aztec army laid siege to the city and bombarded it with arrows and stones. The Spanish defenders were once again overwhelmed and the city fell to the Aztecs. Finally, the Aztec army set its sights on Madrid, the capital of Spain. The Spanish monarchs had fled the city, but thousands of civilians remained. The Aztec army laid siege to the city and began bombarding it with arrows and stones. The Spanish defenders were no match for the Aztec warriors, and soon the city fell to the invaders. With Madrid in their hands, the Aztec emperor was now the ruler of Spain. He established a new capital in Toledo and began to consolidate his power. His empire stretched from the coast of the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea, and he ruled over a diverse population of people. Some of the Spanish nobles and clergy resisted the Aztec rule, but the emperor crushed any opposition and established control over the entire Iberian Peninsula. In the years that followed, the Aztec emperor's influence spread throughout Europe. His army, with its fierce warriors and strange weapons, had shocked the continent, and there was no denying their power. As the Aztecs expanded their territory, they came into contact with other European powers, including Portugal, France, and England. At first, the Aztecs were able to hold off these powers, but eventually they were forced to make alliances and form treaties, in order to protect their empire. So what happens next? Well, that depends on your perspective. From an Aztec viewpoint, their gods had blessed them with victory, and their empire was at its peak. Their culture and customs were spreading throughout Europe, and their influence was growing by the day. However, from a European viewpoint, it was a nightmare scenario. Their land had been invaded and conquered by a foreign power, and their way of life was in danger. Many Europeans were horrified by the Aztec practices, such as human sacrifice and cannibalism, while others were fascinated by the Aztec culture and eager to learn more about it. The effects of the Aztec conquest of Spain would have been far-reaching and profound. The course of world history would have been altered forever. Here are just a few of the ways in which the world would have been changed. First and foremost, there would have been no Spanish Empire. The Spanish colonization of the Americas would have never happened, and the indigenous peoples of the Americas would have been spared the devastation that resulted from European colonization. Second, the world would have been a very different place religiously. The Aztec gods would have replaced or merged with Catholic figures in European culture, and human sacrifice would have continued to be practiced in Europe for some time. Imagine a European Christmas celebrated with human sacrifices to Third, chocolate, maize, and obsidian would have spread rapidly throughout Europe, becoming common commodities in everyday life. Chocolate, or zocolatl in Nahuatl, would have likely become a popular drink among the nobility, while maize would have been adopted as a staple crop in many European countries. Obsidian, or mico, in Nahuatl, would have become a sotafta material for tools and weapons due to its sharpness and durability. European swords and razors would have gleamed with the cutting edge of obsidian. Fourth, the art and architecture of the Aztecs would have influenced European art and architecture to a significant degree. The monumental pyramids, temples, and palaces of the Aztecs would have inspired European architects, while the intricate sculptures and paintings of the Aztecs would have captivated European art lovers. Fifth, the scientific and technological knowledge of the Aztecs would have been shared with Europe, potentially leading to advancements in astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. The Aztecs were highly skilled astronomers, and their knowledge of the solar system could have helped European scientists refine their understanding of the universe. Their advanced mathematics could have contributed to the development of new technologies, while their sophisticated engineering skills could have led to the construction of new buildings and bridges. Overall, the Aztec conquest of Spain would have had a profound impact on world history. The course of civilization would have been altered forever. But what if the Aztecs didn't conquer Spain? What if they simply changed it? Would the Aztecs have been able to survive Europe's climate, diseases, and internal politics? Or would Spain have ultimately triumphed in the long term? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more alternate history, and remember, wouldn't you live in an Aztec Europe?